Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today. Glad to have the opportunity to sit down with you for a minute and talk to you a little bit about a couple of things. One, a tournament I just had the opportunity to fish, but more importantly, for this particular video, how I wound up doing and how I wound up doing what I did. So I wound up fourth place, did not win, but I would have had big fish had I not been too cheap to buy into the big fish pot. Lesson learned, that's the second time that's bitten me. I gotta stop doing that. So, went up to Lake Guntersville and had not been on Lake Guntersville. This is 2 weeks ago, so this was late June, and had not been on the lake since April. And the trip that I had taken in April was the first time I'd been on the lake in about 2 years. So have not been on the lake very much. I knew I was not going to get the opportunity to practice, and I just went up there with the intent of fishing shallow in the relative scheme of things. I knew I was going to punch grass and throw a frog, and that was all I was going to do, and that is all I did. And it was awesome. I had such a wonderful time. And at the end of this video, I'll put a couple of snippets or a few snippets from the day going on out there. But it was just a great opportunity to get out and fish and do things the way I like to do them. And I'll talk more about the rod and reel and things like that I used in just a second. But what I really want to talk about is punching just in general and some observations I made out there. And hopefully perhaps you'll pick up some small tidbits that perhaps you can apply the next time you're out there. And I know I definitely learned quite a bit from this last outing. So got up there and pulled out there, and right off the bat I noticed there were quite a few bluegill around the mats. I could hear the mats, they just sounded alive. You could hear the bluegill underneath pulling bugs off. You could, when you're on the trolling motor, you would see bluegill swim out from under mats. There were very large gizzard shad in the mats, as there are with many of the TVA lakes around here. But the bluegill were just everywhere, and that'll be important in just a minute. So what I want to talk about is to do the punching in and of itself. Yeah, the rod and reel, it's definitely important, but it really starts with how you get everything set up on the business end. So my setup is, and you can't really see these, but these are the flat out tungsten weight stops, bobber stops as the case may be. I use a couple of those. I use two anytime I'm using more than 1 ounce because they sometimes tear, one will pull off, or one sometimes just will not stop the weight from moving. But what I really want to focus on, and kind of the reason I'm making this video, is I wanted to show you something I learned this particular trip about weights. And for me, I use the flat out tungsten weights. I found that their chip proof finish and the fact that they don't abrade your line is huge. It really increases efficiency, and you'll see what I mean in just a minute. I mean, the flat out tungsten folks are always thinking about how to make fishing just in general more efficient, as some of their sister companies, Bruiser Baits, Bass Addiction. But this particular thing that I'm going to show you here momentarily it's something that's been out for a little while, and it will make your punching more efficient. I promise you that. So obviously with punching 3/4 ounce all the way up to 2.5 ounce, I generally stay away from anything above a 2 ounce just because it forces the fish's mouth open and you run the risk of losing more fish. I'm not saying you should never use a heavier weight, because sometimes that's the only kind of weight you can get down through, perhaps whatever it is that you're trying to get through, whatever kind of vegetation. But day in, day out, if I could only have one weight for punching, the 1.25 ounce flat out tungsten is my choice. And this is their traditional punching weight. You'll notice it's got the taper, the bullet shape, the concave base, the chip proof finish, all those sorts of things that you need in a quality weight. But I want to show you another weight that they make. It came out a couple of years ago, maybe a little more than a couple of years ago now. And it's called the front loader. And I'll try to get it close enough to the camera where you can see. It's got little strakes, basically more tungsten material in the front of the weight up there around the line top, the bobber stops, the weight stops. And what that does is it puts more weight at the front of the weight itself. So as the bait holistically enters the water, you've got more weight right there to punch down. And where I really like that is when I'm punching heavily matted hydrilla, heavily matted milfoil, or perhaps a mix, especially a mix, because the milfoil tends to lay over on top of the hydrilla and you get a mat that forms, or a canopy that forms from that. One thing you will notice, and I'll tell you why this is important momentarily, is that the cross section, how wide the front loader is more so, or is more pronounced than the tapered regular bullet weight. Why does that matter? On the TBA impoundments, like Lake Gunnersville, there's a lot of places you'll find hydrilla mats that are either slightly submerged or emerged, and eelgrass, which is very pervasive now on many of the impoundments on the Tennessee, has blown in and almost interlocked itself, almost like a lattice work. And what I really like, that is where I really do make the call on the tapered weight, because what I want is when this hits, would it be nicer to have a little bit of weight down here? I can always go to a little bit heavier weight, 1.5 ounces or whatever, 1.75 ounces. But what I want is I want that sharp, if you will, and I'm using air quotes here, end of the weight to hit and push that eelgrass out of the way, which then allows the bait not to lose momentum as it's crashing down through the mat in and of itself. So the weight is really, really important, and that's where I really, really like these flat out tungstens. They give you a couple of options depending on the nature of the cover that you're fishing. So check them out for sure. So I talked to you about the stops, I talked to you about the weights. My hook is a 4/0 VMC redline hook. I like the finish on the hook. It's got a nice smooth finish. It's got a point that doesn't tend to roll back, and it's super easy to sharpen if you hang it on a rock or hang it in something hard, whatever the case may be, and just need to sharpen it. They're easy to sharpen, but I like them because they don't tear your baits up either. They've got a bait keeper that is essentially almost like a heavy fluorocarbon that holds the bait on. On the business end, last but not least, what I wanted to talk about is the profile of the bait. Almost everybody has a favorite style, no matter what company makes it. I, for this particular outing, chose the Bruiser Baits Avenger. And the reason I wanted it, once again, was because I noticed as I got out there, there was tons of bluegill. So I knew I wanted a little wider profile, a little bit more aggressive of a profile. And the Avenger looks like your normal beaver bait. You know, there's beaver baits that are out there, different companies make them, and they all work just fine. I do like the fact that it's got these little subtle legs on the side. You can pull them off if you don't want them. There's 4 of them, but I do like that extra little bit of vibration, because if you think about it, when this punches through the mat, it's really dark under there. So the more vibration you can get under there, especially when the water's warm, and the fish tend to be more aggressive anyway, the more vibration, the easier it is for those fish to find the bait. And there were a few fish that I caught that I actually had to move the bait quite a bit. It wasn't drop it through and they hit it immediately, not on all of them. But here's the only modification I made to the bait was, and you'll notice this is kind of a green pumpkin with some colored flake in it, again, because of the forage, trying to match that hatch, the bluegill hatch, if you will. Something I did is I also noticed that the bluegill, I was watching them when they would sit next to the mat and they're kind of moving their tail back and forth, very blue. Not a color I normally dye. Living here in Alabama, we tend to use a lot of chartreuse dye. I'm not saying they wouldn't have bitten the bait with the chartreuse dye, but I took and just made about halfway up the pinchers this blue color, which blue, by the way, if you ever go to Florida, or if you're down in Florida, you already know this, keep a bottle of that with you, because it's huge down there. But it made I feel like it made a difference. Another thing that I did was, I've got a hydro wave, and I know some people think that it's snake oil, things like that. I don't necessarily know that it gets you more bites. I don't know that it provokes a fish to bite. I will tell you this, it does cover the sound of your boat. It covers you stomping around in the boat. It helps cover up the sound. If your electronics are running, it helps cover up that clicking noise. And I compare it to, you may not be thinking about a snack, and then your friend or your wife or your husband or whatever the case, maybe he goes up, opens the fridge door, and you're like, you know what, now that I think about it, why don't we throw some pizza rolls in the oven or whatever. So I feel like it just kind of perhaps is almost like an appetizer. So I set it to the bluegill setting on my hydro wave just to help cover the noise of the boat. And I noticed that I got quite a few bites after doing that. So again, I just feel it gives me a little bit of additional confidence. As far as my rod and reel setup, I use a 710, and this is a heavy plus. This is not an extra heavy. And this is an FX Custom Rod Extreme Angler Series. And I really like the rod because it's got a parabolic bend to it. It's 7'10", so it's got a lot of backbone. But I use the heavy plus. I very rarely, in fact, the only place that I use an extra heavy is when I'm fishing gator vine, places like that down in Florida. Maybe pads and hyacinths, where the fish tend to run and wrap around the grass, and you may have to try to pull them back around the grass. In the hydrilla and in the eelgrass, they tend to just ball up in it. So you just need to be able to keep constant pressure, and this really allows me to do that. And it also gives me a little bit of a tip, because there was a few hits where the bait dropped through at hop, and they'd hit it as it was sinking back down, maybe on hop number 3, And so when I'd lift and they'd be loading against it, I don't want them to let go of the bait immediately, simply because they feel the pressure of the rod. 65-pound goat rope braid, which you can get also at the Bruiser Baits website, and then a lose reel. And I use a 7.5 to 1. Some guys use an 8.3. When you're only fishing 15, 20 feet away from the boat, retrieve is not as important. Now, if you're making really long pitches, or you're pitching very deep grass where maybe you're on Toledo Bend and letting it sink 8, 10 feet, or whatever the case may be, you may want a little bit faster retrieve. I found the 7.5 to 1 kind of fills the gap. I still have plenty of torque. I have plenty of uptake of line. I want to say it takes up, I want to say in the neighborhood of 24 inches of line per turn of the handle. I didn't have any issues staying ahead of the fish, especially considering, again, they tend to bury up in that. So that was the setup I had. I caught, my biggest fish was a 6.22. Caught him kind of, her, kind of midday. I had 1750 was my total weight. Had some smaller fish that I just couldn't get rid of. I had 2 fish that would have helped that I just couldn't get in the boat. I set the hook on them and they'd come up and blow through the mat and shake the hook. And that's the one disadvantage to a big heavy weight. It gives them a lot of leverage, especially if they're skin hooked or hooked, you know, funny in the side of the mouth. But I just wanted to share with you a couple of things that worked for me, some lessons I learned, particularly with using the dye to match the hatch, if you will. And hopefully some of these things help you improve your punch game or help take you to the next level. And that being said, thanks again for joining me today. Get it. Yes, that was. Get out of there. Oh, geez Louise. Oh, wait till you see this one. Good Lord willing, get in here. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Look at this pig.